He stands before us, a symbol of evil. But much of Hitler's life has remained shrouded in mystery.
Hitler represents the mystery that we have to keep pursuing.
Now medical detectives offer a new view. Bizarre sadomasochistic sexual practices. A Führer addicted to drugs. And a fatal disease that may have sped Germany's defeat.
There is no question that he has Parkinson's.
Hitler's medical secrets are revealed next. Hitler. Many consider him the most evil and ruthless tyrant to ever live. His record is chilling. 6 million Jews. 3 million Soviet prisoners. Hundreds of thousands of gypsies, homosexuals, and the disabled. All exterminated. He led Germany into a destructive world war that would leave millions more dead and displaced. 60 years later, medical detectives are still trying to unravel the secrets behind Hitler's rise and fall. Their goal is not to explain Hitler's behavior, but to expose a carefully concealed medical profile that may have helped influence the course of history. The search for clues leads back to 1889, with Hitler's birth in Braunau, Austria. The medical investigators first question, does Hitler's youth offer insights into what shaped his fanatical views? Hitler is a weak, frail newborn. His father Alois is stern and domineering. He likely beats his son. His mother Clara is depressed. She seeks solace in her boy Adolf, and even has him sleep in her own bed.
We know that Hitler grew up very close to his mother. The family physician said it was the closest mother-son relationship he had ever seen.
In January 1907, Hitler's mother Clara is diagnosed with breast cancer. She has the standard treatment of the time, a mastectomy. Historian Rudolf Binion searches for clues about this period of Hitler's life. He finds the medical records of Clara's Jewish doctor, Edward Bloch. These records indicate that 17-year-old Hitler persuades Dr. Bloch to try a radical and unproven treatment. High doses of a harsh disinfectant. Called iodoform, it burns the skin, causes vomiting and hallucinations. It is both useless and extremely painful.
We can follow Adolf Hitler day by day through the treatment of his mother. We can see him going through this torment as she is systemically poisoned ultimately by the cumulative effect of overdoses of iodoform. Ultimately, she dies on the 21st of December.
The young Hitler is grief-stricken. As he writes in Mein Kampf, "It was a dreadful blow. I had honored my father, but my mother I had loved." Binion believes believes Hitler is now ravaged by guilt for causing his mother so much agony. But instead of blaming himself, he may unconsciously rage against the Jewish doctor. Binion believes that this is the root of Hitler's virulent anti-Semitism.
His rhetoric was suspicious because it was always the Jewish poisoner, the Jewish cancer, the Jewish profiteer. It pointed back to his mother's terminal treatment by a Jewish doctor, which was ultimately a disaster. He had it in for the Jewish doctor and projected it onto the Jew.
Something else strange happens. Rudolf Binion, a psychohistorian, believes that Hitler's close and tormented relationship with his mother may throw his sexual identity into crisis. According to classic Freudian psychology, it may carry major implications for the development of his future sex life.
I found no serious indication of any active sex life in his adulthood. It seems like a stunted development of a mama's boy who was very much erratically enthralled by his mother, who was attached to her and could not detach himself from her.
In 1908, soon after his mother's death, medical detectives track Hitler to Vienna, where he moves to become an artist. These paintings show his impressions of the city. Viennese society is sexually permissive. And yet, Hitler reportedly shuns women. In fact, over 5 years in Vienna, there's no evidence he ever has sexual relations with a woman. Though some historians suspect he may be secretly involved with men.
He's very hard to track during this period. At one point, he stayed in a men's shelter, and there's some speculation that this men's shelter was a hotbed of male prostitution. And there's been some speculation that Hitler got involved in this.
In 1914, 25-year-old Hitler leaves Vienna to fight in World War I. Allegations of homosexuality follow him into the trenches. A fellow soldier alleges that he witnesses Hitler performing sex acts with other soldiers. Hitler's homosexuality remains uncorroborated. But some psychologists believe his desire to suppress his own impulses may be at the root of his later persecution of homosexuals. In 1918, the war ends in a humbling defeat and a crippling peace treaty. Germany will be racked by unemployment and hyperinflation. Hitler, now 29 years old, joins what will become the Nazi Party and begins preaching nationalism and anti-Semitism. He writes, "The army command made one mistake, that it did not string up in good time all the filthy Jewish rabble that drove our people into the dreadful calamity in 1918. Their heads will roll. The Jew's skull will be smashed by the Germanic will." As chief spokesman for the Nazi Party, Hitler's fame grows day by day. Yet Hitler remains single and likely celibate. Then, in 1927, at the age of 37, Hitler begins the most mysterious liaison of his life. Her name is Geli Raubal. At 18, she is half his age. Even stranger, she is his own niece. But Hitler is reportedly at ease with her, as with no one else.
Hitler liked to squire her around in his Mercedes touring the countryside. Was she his date or was she his half-niece? It's like so much about Hitler, it was ambiguous.
Geli soon moves into Hitler's Munich apartment. It is unclear what their sex life, if any, is like. Over their 5-year relationship, they keep separate bedrooms. But controversial statements collected by American intelligence indicate that Hitler is forcing Geli to participate in bizarre sadomasochistic practices.
According to a couple of writers, Hitler had unusual sexual demands, and these were disturbing to Geli. They were masochistic and involved Hitler's wanting to be urinated on and defecated on, and that was his only way of becoming aroused fully.
On September 18th, 1931, Geli is found lying on the floor of her bedroom in a pool of blood, shot in the chest. The gun is Hitler's revolver. Geli is just 23 years old.
The big question is, did Geli commit suicide? The theory that people put forward is that Hitler asked Geli to do something sexually that was so odious, she couldn't handle it, that she committed suicide. She was driven to suicide by his perverse desires.
How Geli dies remains a mystery. What we do know is that this serious relationship with a woman ends in disaster. Hitler soon enters a deep depression. And to the medical detectives, Geli's death signals the end of Hitler's attempts at anything resembling a conventional relationship.
Geli was Hitler's last chance at normalcy. That here is this woman who seemed to be fairly uninhibited, and Hitler had a shot at being normal. And that the way it ended marked a turning point for Hitler. From then on, 1931 on, we see Hitler at his most monstrous.
After Geli's death, Hitler now acts out his sadomasochistic tendencies on the world stage. He channels all his energy into politics. Hitler has failed with women and possibly men, but it seems he has finally found a relationship, an obsessive affair with political power. The passion can be heard in his frequent speeches. Medical detectives find a bizarre confirmation that for Hitler, politics replaces sex. He becomes sexually aroused by his own voice.
Hitler told 2 of his physicians that during his speeches, he had orgasms. And this embarrassed him, and he asked them to give him some remedy so that he wouldn't have orgasms or even sexual excitement during his speeches. And they advised him to leave things as they were, because if he got rid of this sexual excitement, he would lose the power of his oratory.
This was his sex life. It was all projected. It was all onto Germany. It was all, as it were, sublimated with a vengeance.
Hitler is seducing the German people. Millions are succumbing to the power of his oratory.
When you see the newsreels, apparently they don't come close to capturing the effect of seeing Hitler in person. In person, people would faint. People would talk about it as if they were swooning erotically, women would, and men sometimes even.
The dictator himself admits he has little interest in women. He declares, "My bride is Germany." Hitler's sociopathic personality is now firmly formed. His sadistic tendencies, his anti-Semitism, all channeled towards power and politics. It is a frightening mixture that will ignite World War II and the Holocaust, bringing unimaginable death and destruction to Europe. And it may be fueled by a strange doctor and a mysterious injection. The year is 1935, and Adolf Hitler is now firmly in control of Germany. He passes the Nuremberg laws, banning intermarriage with Jews and effectively depriving them of any political rights. He soon makes his first military move, reoccupying the West Bank of the Rhine and breaking the Treaty of Versailles. Around this time, Hitler comes under the care of an eccentric doctor named Theo Morell. Morell will inject the Führer with his own secret concoction. In the coming years, Hitler becomes one of the most successful military commanders of all time. Now, a medical detective tries to determine exactly what was in those injections. The medical investigation begins when psychiatrist Leonard Heston becomes fascinated by Hitler's health.
I didn't know what was wrong with him. He was obviously an ill man, and I couldn't figure it out. And I became puzzled by Hitler's medical state. I couldn't make a diagnosis.
What puzzles Heston most is Hitler's radical change in behavior. The Führer starts out as a careful and deliberate strategist. But later, his decisions become impulsive. His rages become uncontrollable. And weirdest of all, his mood is often euphoric, even in the worst of times. Heston begins an investigation of what's causing Hitler's severe mood changes. Heston finds that Hitler is obsessed with disease. He is phobic about cancer, perhaps because of his mother's death. He prefers natural and unconventional medicine.
It's important to emphasize how obsessed Hitler was with health, with the purity of the body as a reflection of the purity of the nation. And it was very much a rhetoric of the body. All of his rhetoric is about this cleansing, eliminating anything that departs from this idealized nation.
Hitler himself writes, "If the power to fight for one's own health is no longer present, the right to live in this world of struggle ends." Heston's investigation leads him to Dr. Theo Morell, whose specialty is treating aristocrats and celebrities. In 1936, Morell begins treating Germany's most famous celebrity. For years, Hitler has been plagued by digestive problems. He has embarrassing flatulence and severe pain that Heston believes is the result of gallstones. Morell prescribes an unorthodox treatment. Capsules filled with living bacteria cultured from the feces of a Bulgarian peasant. Though the treatment remains unproven, the patient is delighted with the results. Over the next few years, Morell adds treatment after treatment. Countless drugs to relieve digestive problems, dull pain, overcome insomnia, even leeches to remove blood. Then, around 1941, Morell begins injecting Hitler with one of his strange concoctions. He claims it is vitamins. Heston tracks down and questions a surviving eyewitness to the injections, Hitler's valet, Heinz Linge.
Linge's answer was, well, he became fresh, he energized. He was ready to face the day and go out and conduct the war. And it was immediate. Immediate. The needle was still in the arm, and Hitler showed this alertness. There was something that didn't square up medically, an intravenous injection of vitamins. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
Heston goes on a hunt to find out what was in these mysterious injections. At the National Archives, he finds 35 rolls of microfilm. These are the medical records of Dr. Morell. He examines them closely. Yet they do not reveal the secret. Then, Heston tracks down the curious doctor who during the war secretly analyzed Morell's preparation. The results are so damaging that Hitler's second-in-command, Heinrich Himmler, has the laboratory report destroyed. For it shows that Hitler is taking methamphetamine. The Nazi leader is addicted to speed. During World War II, the German military is known to use amphetamines, also called speed, uppers, pep pills, and even Nazi dope. Amphetamines boost the level of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. They increase alertness and confidence, as well as hostility and aggression. They can even cause psychosis. Nazi stormtroopers take amphetamines to run farther, Luftwaffe pilots to stay awake, and the Führer himself may use these drugs to gain an upper hand. Based on the medical records, Heston concludes that the Führer begins taking speed, first in pill form, in the late 1930s. This is a period when Hitler is making daring and intimidating diplomatic moves. He absorbs Austria into Germany, then annexes parts of Czechoslovakia, all without firing a shot.
I think his very aggressive diplomacy, where he dominated European politics, That's hard for me to see him doing, unless perhaps even at that early time he was preparing for his conferences with a little bit of oral amphetamine.
Hitler's bold moves continue. But now they are military moves. In September 1939, he invades Poland. His strategy is the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. A deadly combination of surprise, speed, and highly focused attacks. Over the next months, Nazi forces sweep through Western Europe in a firestorm of conquest. But in June 1941, Hitler makes a blunder. He launches a massive invasion of Russia, opening up a second front. It is by most accounts a careless decision. But according to Heston's theory, just the kind of reckless thinking brought on by amphetamine use. At first, the Germans meet with success. But eventually, the Russians hold back the invasion. They stall the Germans until the fierce Russian winter sets in, and temperatures drop to -40. Now, for the first time, Hitler is feeling the heavy stress of war. It is at this point that Heston believes Dr. Morell switches from pills to injections of speed.
If you need constant state of stimulation over a period of time, as I think probably Hitler needed before Moscow, then you have to take it much more frequently. And he got injections as the war went on when bad news came in.
Soon, Hitler likely becomes tolerant to the drug, needing ever more injections to have the same effect. In fact, he may be getting so much speed that it is having toxic effects.
At least from Stalingrad onward. He bit at the skin around his nails. Linga said it was his most characteristic gesture. It is something that's seen with toxic amphetamine users. I've never seen it anyplace else. So I think it's quite important.
Rage can also be a side effect of amphetamine use. And now Hitler's rages are growing out of control. Even the head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Himmler, begins calling his behavior bizarre. Amphetamine abuse may even be affecting Hitler's thought processes.
When you reach a toxic stage, thinking becomes stilted and lacking in original elements. It lacks the flexibility to come up with alternative courses of action. These are all descriptions of Hitler that occur at the time. And this was extremely detrimental.
By 1943, Hitler's invasion of Russia has gone terribly wrong. Two German armies are encircled, trapped by a bitter winter and Soviet artillery. Hitler's generals advocate surrender, but perhaps due in part to amphetamine abuse, he remains inflexible. He insists on a no-retreat policy, forcing his men to fight, sending tens of thousands of his troops to die. Eventually, the Germans at Stalingrad are forced to surrender. It is one of Hitler's first major defeats. A crack widening in the once invincible German army. To Dr. Leonard Heston, a doctor and his drug may have changed the course of history. And his discovery provides a unique window into Hitler's behavior. Amphetamines may have made Hitler aggressive in the beginning and reckless in the end. But it's a disease, not a drug, that may ultimately bring Hitler down for good. The year is 1940. With uncanny military prowess and fueled by amphetamines, Hitler pushes through Western Europe. Nazi troops overrun Norway, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, and finally capture the greatest prize of all, France. And yet, something stops Hitler's conquest in its tracks. Now, a medical detective has developed a new theory. What drove Hitler to defeat was a fatal illness. Hitler lost the war, in part, because he was being ravaged by disease. The story begins in Brooklyn, at a time when an American schoolboy is fascinated by the evils of Nazi Germany.
When I was growing up, Hitler in Brooklyn was the devil. It occurred to me, why did this man want to kill me? Why did he want to kill all the Jews? I became obsessed with Germany and Hitler.
Lieberman's obsession with Hitler follows him through college and medical school. It stays with him as he becomes a leading expert in Parkinson's disease. In 1992, Dr. Lieberman hears about an extraordinary newsreel of Hitler. The Fuhrer has always managed his image zealously. He suppresses anything that might show weakness. But the footage you are about to see somehow escapes the German censors. Dr. Lieberman begins watching the tape. The little-known 1945 Swedish newsreel. It reveals an image that no one outside the Fuhrer's inner circle has ever seen before.
You see Hitler walking. His left hand is hanging limply at his side, but there is a tremor. It's as though he is rotating his hands. And it's very clear and it's very convincing. It is the tremor of Parkinson's disease. There is no question in the mind of any neurologist who saw this that this is Parkinson's disease.
It is a stunning theory. Hitler, the endless promoter of Aryan strength and health, may have been ravaged by an insidious neurological disease. Parkinson's affects a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. This region normally produces the neurotransmitter dopamine, which helps govern movement. When Parkinson's disease strikes, it destroys dopamine-producing cells. At first, lack of dopamine causes tremors. Then it clouds thinking. Eventually, it results in complete immobility and death. With no treatment available at the time, Parkinson's will slowly but surely cripple Hitler's body and mind. Dr. Lieberman begins looking for evidence to back up his theory. He will first try to find Hitler's earliest symptoms of Parkinson's disease and track its course. He gathers 300 hours of film spanning Hitler's career. He examines it chronologically with the eye of a police investigator.
So I began to look at hundreds and hundreds of videotapes of Hitler in the 20s and in the 30s. And what I began to see was before 1932, when you see him, he's gesticulating with both hands.
But after 1932, Hitler hardly moves his left arm, often grasping it with his other hand. To Lieberman's expert eye, it is the first visible sign of Parkinson's disease. Lieberman's footage analysis shows evidence of Parkinson's when Hitler is just 43 years old. While most cases of Parkinson's strike the elderly, some 10% like Hitler's are early onset, affecting those under 50. Hitler's disease raises a mystery. Why don't others recognize the Führer's fatal illness?
It should have been obvious to everyone. I had read books by people who had been with Hitler. No one had mentioned anything about Parkinson's. So you begin to ask yourself, why?
Dr. Lieberman believes Hitler deliberately hides any signs of his illness from the German public. His censors release only photos that show him in a flattering light. To protect his image of Aryan purity, the man who rose to power on the greatness of his speeches is making fewer and fewer public appearances. It is likely around 1940 that Hitler's doctors provide a diagnosis for his tremors. At that time, a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease is a death warrant. There are no drugs like L-Dopa to slow the course of deterioration.
When somebody told him that he had Parkinson's disease and it was going to kill him in 3 or 4 years, then he was short of time if he was going to conquer all of Europe as he had promised, including Russia. He had to do it right then.
Hitler now speeds up his plans for conquest. He recklessly invades Russia, foolishly opening up a second front. It will bring Hitler one of his first defeats and mark a turning point in the war. Historians have always wondered why Hitler made such an uncharacteristic move. Some suspect amphetamines, but it is just as likely a seriously ill Hitler may have been trying desperately to outrace his own death. By now, Hitler's fanatical campaign of persecution is in full swing. He is sending Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies to the death camps. he is also euthanizing the sick and disabled. It is possible that this may in part be sparked by a hatred of his own disease. (1944). Over 12 years of Parkinson's has taken its toll. Hitler is 55, but he looks 70. He's trembling, stumbling, and shuffling. Still, none of his loyal inner circle dare to break the code of silence.
His valet, the servants, the secretaries, Eva Braun, Goebbels, we know, didn't say anything. People who were close to Hitler, who were devoted to him, did not mention his Parkinson's disease.
By now, the neurological effects of Parkinson's are likely clouding Hitler's judgment. Hitler has become indecisive. He behaves irrationally. And he is about to commit a fatal blunder that may cost him the war. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied forces stormed the beaches of France. The assault itself is no surprise, but its location in Normandy is. Hitler has been insisting the attack will come some 150 miles away at Calais. Hitler is inflexible and slow to respond, possibly due to his advancing Parkinson's. His generals urge him to send panzer divisions to beat back the invasion. Hitler refuses. By the time he changes his mind, it is too late. The Allies now have a beachhead. They begin their relentless march to free Europe. Hitler may have been a brilliant military strategist, but he is no match for the degenerative power of Parkinson's. A disease, in addition to the Allied forces, may well have triggered the defeat of Adolf Hitler. And yet it is not an illness that will take Hitler's life. Only now can the mystery of Hitler's death be revealed. The last chapter in Hitler's life begins in January 1945. The Russians are a mere 40 miles from Berlin, the German capital. The British are bombing the city by night, and the Americans by day. Much of this great metropolis has been reduced to rubble. Hitler and his entourage retreat to an underground command center in the heart of Berlin. It is called the Führer Bunker, a bomb-proof suite of rooms buried deep beneath the gardens of the Chancellery. By now, Hitler is severely ill. In addition to Parkinson's, he has suffered at least one small stroke. There are signs of brain damage and widespread vascular disease.
He was a dying man. He was really in very bad shape. And they said that in the bunker at the end, they had to have a bench every few feet so he could stagger from one thing to the next.
He drools and spittle is coming out of him. He's hunched over. One hand shakes, another hand shakes. He can't get around the way he one time did. He can't shout at people because his voice just doesn't have it. So he's a miserable person.
In a rare moment of rationality, Hitler admits the situation is hopeless. and he decides to kill himself. Only now, facing his own death, does he take Eva Braun, his loyal companion of 15 years, as his wife. Like all his other relationships, this one has been sexually ambiguous. It is not known if they ever had sex, and they're unlikely to do so tonight. For Hitler, like some 1/3 of men with Parkinson's, is probably impotent. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the day after the wedding, Hitler makes his final move.
Then Hitler and Eva Braun went into his study. He disappeared behind the closed door. And they committed suicide. Or did they? This would be a mystery for years thereafter.
The Soviets rush to the bunker and claim to find Hitler's body. Then, they say they didn't. Stalin goes so far as to say that Hitler probably escaped, launching a flood of speculation. And yet 60 years after his death, medical detectives think they know exactly what happened to Hitler's body. Eyewitnesses report that after Hitler shot himself, his body was soaked with gasoline and burned for 2.5 hours.
What happens when a body is burned? The heat begins to tear open the skin. The skull can even burst. The fat and the water are also destroyed. The bodies begin to shrink. What they saw was that after the first hour, the bodies were badly charred, and after the second hour, there was nothing left.
No one ever found Hitler's body, not because he escaped, but because all that remained was ashes. Today, medical detectives are gaining a different perspective on Hitler's life. They are not providing any rationalization for his malevolence. Instead, they are helping to unearth previously hidden medical secrets and shed new light on some of his most disturbing decisions. Hitler's vision of conquest turned so dark that some portray him in mythological terms. But the medical record shows that he was not at all mythical. The dictator that many consider the most evil of men met a common fate: addiction, disease, and ultimately suicide.